a great company of his disciples and a huge crowd of people from all around Judea and Jerusalem and the area around Tyre and Sidon joined him there. They came to hear him and to be healed from their diseases, and those bothered by unclean spirits were healed. The whole crowd wanted to touch him because the power was going out from him and he was healing everyone. Jesus raised his eyes to his disciples and said, "Happy are you who are poor, because God's kingdom is yours. Happy are you who hunger now, because you will be satisfied. Happy are you who weep now, because you will laugh. Happy are you when people hate you, reject you, insult you, and condemn your name as evil because of the human one. Rejoice when that happens. Leap for joy because you have a great reward in heaven. Their ancestors did the same things to the prophets. But how terrible for you who are rich, because you have already received your comfort. How terrible for you who have plenty now, because you'll be hungry. How terrible for you who laugh now, because you will mourn and weep. How terrible for you when all speak well of you. Their ancestors did the same things to the false prophets. And now...
Good morning again. Whether or not you play or have ever purchased a lottery ticket, it doesn't take much to join in on that fantasy of the blessings of the rich. Have you ever daydreamed about, well, what would it be like if I were to win a few $100 million? Have you ever thought about how different life might be? The stuff you buy, the vacation you take, I don't know, maybe you'd call David Bromstead on My Lottery Dream Home and have him pick you out that $1 million view. Or maybe it's not the lottery. I mean, you know, it could be an everyday artist who is trying to eke out a living best as she can. She's been toiling away for years. Her studio brings in a little bit, but, you know, not a lot. And so she barely makes ends meet from week to week when one day a renowned gallery owner happens to stumble into her shop, and he's blown away by the emotions that she can capture in her paintings and her talents. And so he invites her and decides to take a chance on her and feature her in an exhibition which ends up turning her whole life around. And so her life is transformed. And as a single mom, she's no longer worrying about how am I going to support my family. And the kids can take their vacation. And she can continue creating without all the financial worries that she's had in the past. For the artist, this profound turn of events and profound blessing is an affirmation of maybe her dedication and passion. Most of us consider wealth to be a blessing. But Jesus may or may not see it that way according to this week's gospel. Happy are you who are poor, because God's kingdom is yours. But how terrible for you who are rich, because you have already received your comfort. Now, today's text is Luke's version of what we often call the Beatitudes, and they're found in both Matthew and Luke's gospel. Luke's version is a bit different from Matthew's. Contextually, one takes place on a plain and the other on a mount. The biggest, of course, difference being, of course, the terribles that are found in Luke's gospel. Some texts use the word woe to you instead of how terrible for you. Either way, words like terrible and woe are not exactly terms of endearment. They aren't terms that we tend to embrace. Some call Luke's version of the Beatitudes the text of the blessings and curses. Jesus blesses the poor, the hungry, and those who weep, while he essentially says, but you know, for those of you who are rich and whose hunger is satisfied, and even those who laugh in the present, well, how terrible for you, because you've already received your comfort. Now, that's what we all want to hear on Sunday morning, isn't it? It's what we all want to hear. Too bad, so sad, you've already got what's coming to you. No wonder we would prefer to hear and preach Matthew's version as opposed to Brother Luke's. Matthew has the gift of compassion. Luke, the gift of compassion, appears to be registering at about 0. Nevertheless, Luke makes us ask some really powerful questions that sometimes we prefer not to entertain. First of all, what's wrong with being rich? Is it a sin to have food on the table and stuff in the pantry? What's Jesus got against laughing anyway? Any good therapist will tell you that laughing is good for the soul. So I don't know. What I do know is if we take notice, the crowd that Jesus is addressing is a mixed crowd. And so there's rich and there's poor present. Those who have great happiness are gathered alongside those who life's dealt some pretty tough stuff. The poor, the rich, the hungry, those who weep, those who laugh, those who are hated, those who are loved, they're all gathered there together. It's a mixed bag. And seen in this light, it's easy to think or even suggest, well, you know, maybe Jesus is just playing favorites. And he sees the poor and the brokenhearted as the teacher's pet. Besides, what better way for Jesus to gain the sympathies of the least of these and folks who have less than or are considered less than in society? On the other hand, it's just as easy to say Jesus is treating those who are rich and whose bellies are full and tear ducts dry as outcast and sinners, making them out to be the uglies. I think it's easy to quickly sink into this kind of dualistic thinking in today's text, especially when our present culture is so us versus them focused. And yet I don't believe that that's what is going on in this text. It doesn't really jive with Jesus' love your neighbor as yourself theology. So perhaps Jesus is doing a little bit more than telling a certain group of people what they do or don't want to hear. Could it be that Jesus has a deeper spiritual truth that has more to do with maybe the nature of our happiness, the purpose in life, finding some kind of meaning, than it does with maybe the actual blessing or state of our being? Conversely, maybe that word terrible doesn't mean a suggested finger-pointing terrible you or despicable me. In times of trouble, you know, we often hear folks say, well, count your blessings, look on the bright side. Oh, you know, you should keep a blessing journal. The truth is, we're always eager to count our blessings, and we're always eager to count somebody else's blessings. That's kind of fun. How happy are they who, you know, we believe how happy are they that've got the nice home, the newest bad boy truck, all the high-tech devices to play with. You know, the neighbor, they have a great kid. They never have any trouble with their kids. They always stack up. On the other hand, it's equally true that those who have very little immaterial goods have great kids, are quick to count their blessings, and they too experience and find happiness. Many times I've heard those with very little say, but you know, I am rich in so many ways. And didn't Job ask, will we receive the good from God and not also receive the bad, the blessings and the terribles? So I'm going to suggest maybe the text isn't so much about the haves and the have-nots, blessings and curses, happiness and unhappiness, if all groups of people can find blessing and happiness in their unique situations. Maybe it's about something else. I wonder what it would look like if we saw today's text not so much through a lens of blessing and curses and happiness and woe, but instead through the lens of our search for making sense out of life, meaning, purpose. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a legitimate argument to interpret the text in the ways that we've talked about. Centuries of scholarship have affirmed this dualistic interpretation, and it can be true that it's hard to appreciate a table of bounty when our table's already full. How many times have you taken a pie or a dish and somebody says, well, I just don't know where we're going to put it. We have so much. Winning a few $100s may not be as significant when you have substantial savings. But I think if we look from the text from the perspective of our trying to make sense out of life, we're going to come to a more harmonious outcome. One more reflective of Jesus' commandment to love one another, other than to see one another as being blessed and cursed. After all, Jesus died for all of us, the happy and the terrible, the blessed and the woed. Notice the text we read today uses that word happiness. So what if Jesus is pointing at something that's deeper than our happiness hotspot? What if Jesus is pointing to something that lasts longer than our instant gratification theology of happiness? After all, happiness we find in a new car only lasts so long, it's not long before it's not new anymore, and an ice cream cone can only last so long even if it's in my freezer. From this perspective, one's happiness and woes are kind of circumstantial. Like the lottery, our happiness is based on luck, or as in the artist's case, comes by what is or isn't happening in our lives right now. It wasn't all that long ago that someone said to me, I was so happy, and now it's just all been shattered. Who hasn't experienced that? One day it's rainbows and butterflies, and the next it's rain clouds and thunderstorms. One day we're happy, and the next day not so much. Yesterday the sun was shining, found $100 in my wallet I didn't know I had, and my boss gave me a winning review. And today the furnace quit, the pipes froze, I didn't plan on a trip to the emergency room. You know, I really wish I hadn't spent that $100. Stuff happens. And our circumstances change. And all of that is to say, perhaps we need to consider something deeper and more lasting than a life of happiness and terribles or woes. And I think that's what's going on in today's gospel. Those who are hungry will be filled. Those who are full will be hungry. Those who are laughing will weep. And those who are weeping will laugh. Don't these things happen in each of our lives? Don't we receive this series of blessings and woes in everyday life? Happy and bad days? Isn't it possible we could be happy and terrible at the same time? Of course we can. When I examine my own character, I know how true that is. I can be really happy, but, you know, I can be not so nice at the same time sometimes. Just depends on the setting. So it's possible Jesus is describing that pattern of our lives and not so much the haves and have-nots of the world or the us and them. Maybe Jesus is painting for us a picture of life's ups and downs and the natural rhythm of things. Consider how frequently we alternate between days of joy and sorrow and that blessing and woe. If you go down Jesus' list of blessings and woes, we encounter them all. The problem is we often want to place life's events into one category or another. That was awesome, that was terrible. It's easy to compare our successes and our failures and to fall into the trap of putting our blessings and woes in opposition to one another or wonder which category they belong to. Does it come closer to being really horrible? Does it come closer to being really great? Where does this belong? We do it all the time. Sometimes we get that coveted position at work and we find out, well, that didn't bring me the happiness I wanted. I'm not enjoying this new job at all. Again, I don't think Jesus is trying to set up this dichotomy. Feel great about your character if you're destitute, but truncate your self-esteem if you're rich. Be joyous if you're weeping, but feel guilty if you're not. Don't we all weep over different things? What brings me to tears may not bring you to tears. So I don't put all my eggs in the have and have-nots basket. I don't believe Jesus is establishing a hierarchy or an S&M culture, because Luke makes a point to tell us that Jesus stood on level ground when he spoke about the blessings and the terribles. And that's a significant detail if you ask me. Jesus, the Son of God, and he's joining all of humanity by standing on the level ground with all those gathered. Maybe Jesus is saying, life is about balance. Life is about humanity. It's about all of us together. Maybe Jesus is kind of leveling out the playing field of humanity, after all. Jesus did heal everyone who came, the rich and the poor. So I think it invites us to look beyond circumstances that happen in our day-to-day lives and maybe find meaning and purpose for our lives in every single day, despite what our circumstances are today, whether we're basking in happiness or being assailed by woes. Notice also at the beginning of the text, Jesus is healing the people. And he's healing those who are diseased and who are experiencing, and those who aren't. And he's healing those who are experiencing unclean spirits, which very well could mean feeling as if their spirit is unclean or unworthy. Maybe it's from that perspective of healing that we need to consider things. What if our happiness isn't about the rewards and terribles or punishments? What if our state of being and feeling blessed or terrible isn't about two kinds of people? What if it's about humanity and all of us, depending on where we're at today? What if there are times in each of our lives that Jesus says, "Happy are you," and times when Jesus says, "How terrible for you? How terrible for you?" What if Jesus contrasts the blessings and terribles because he wants us to find wholeness and healing in all things and to find happiness in all circumstances? Perhaps, as Michael Marsh points out, maybe happiness and terrible aren't a status, but insights about our lives for us to consider, lenses or a framework through which to see ourselves and understand ourselves. It's worth considering that Jesus is asking us to look at the poverty, hunger, and weeping in our lives today, as well as the happiness and laughter in our lives today. And if that's the case, the question isn't, which one am I? Am I the happiness guy or the woed one? But how are all these parts of my life, and what do they mean for me today? How are they interacting? Could these Beatitudes be showing me places in my life that need my attention or maybe even need working on? Because the truth is, most of us are happy and terrible at the same time. Most of us can display more positive characteristics of the Beatitudes as well as the terribles. Sometimes we're high-fiving life, and other times we're experiencing the terribles, and maybe we're doing it all at once. So I might suggest that these words of Jesus are intended to open our eyes and hearts to a life of healing, of purpose, of meaning, and of wholeness. Not an us and them culture that says Terrible are you, and blessed are you. After all, it really doesn't do us much good to count our blessings, and it doesn't do us much good to count our woes and misfortunes either. Romans 8:28 tells us that all things work together for good for those who love God. So when Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor, the hungry, and those who weep," he's bearing witness to the truth that God is in charge of this world and God is present in all things. That God is present in the blessings and in the terribles. Yes, God is present in our moments of happiness and great wealth, when life is rich as well as moments of poverty, when our laughter and tears gush amidst the terrible things we experience. In today's text, Luke paints for us a picture of our shared humanity, of life's ebb and flow, and Jesus reminds us that all of life is precious, to love your neighbor as yourself, that the ground upon which we trod is level ground in God's house. Everybody counts. God's blessings are with us through all things, wealth and poverty, sickness and health, laughter and tears, that God is able to bless us in every circumstance. God is able. Our closing hymn.